Hey, good to see you again. Today I'm going to be reviewing what could be one of the best ultra-wide-angle lenses currently on the market. It is the Irix 11mm f4. Now I want to kick this off by saying a huge thank you to Irix for agreeing to loan me a copy of this lens for the purpose of the review. But I do want to stress it's not a sponsored video. I'm not being paid by Irix for anything that I'm going to say. They agreed to loan me the lens so that I could test it for a couple of days, and this is what I've kind of found it to be. So no affiliation whatsoever, but let's see how this lens does. So first off, I would say an unboxing, but it's actually more of an untinning because Irix ship all of their lenses in an awesome metal tin. On a side note, however, just how easily pleased I am, I was impressed by the box because it's got the little cutout for a lens hood. How sad am I? But to the contents of the tin. Inside we have this behemoth. So this is the 11mm f4. Now Irix do currently two lenses. They do the 11 f4 and they also do a 15mm f2.4, both of which kind of look very similar to each other. Now this is the Firefly version of the lens. Currently both of Irix lenses are available in two different versions, the Firefly and then the Blackstone. Now the Blackstone is a slightly more expensive version of the lens, but it's a slightly better made version. So optically both versions are absolutely identical. The optical layout hasn't changed at all. Both the Firefly and the Blackstone are also weather sealed as well. The only difference is that the external construction of the Firefly is mainly plastic, while the Blackstone is more metal. So this lens weighs 730 grams, the Blackstone weighs in about 790, so it's a little bit heavier. This lens also currently is a little over £500 to buy new, whereas the Blackstone is closer to £600. So the Blackstone's obviously a little bit more expensive as well, but you do get that bit more of a rugged build if that's what you're looking for. But to be honest, even though this is the Firefly, the cheaper model with the worst build quality, it still feels pretty tough, to be honest. I mean, it is all plastic, but it does feel pretty sturdy. I've had it fitted to my Sigma MC11 adapter and then fitted onto my Sony a7 III body. And walking around with it, the whole system didn't feel particularly overweighted. The lens is quite heavy, but it didn't feel particularly front heavy on the camera. It was quite a nice balance, to be honest. So whether you're using this on a mirrorless or a DSLR, you'll probably find it quite comfortable to use. In terms of build, as I've already said, this is the Firefly, so the plasticier model. But both the Firefly and the Blackstone are weather sealed as well. They have a rear gasket on the back here next to the lens mount, and then there's also a gasket either side of the focus ring as well. Now this is a manual focus lens, so there's no autofocus switch, there's no image stabilization or anything like that. You have two adjustable rings on this lens. The first one is the focus ring, which you obviously change focus with. The second one is a focus lock, so it's got two positions: unlock and slide it round to lock. Now all this does is it tightens up the focus ring, so when it's all the way to lock, the focus ring becomes really difficult to turn. The good thing with the lock ring is because this is such an ultra wide angle lens, there's inherently quite a deep depth of field with it anyway. So if you know the approximate distance that you're going to be from your subject, you can just set the focus to there, lock it off, and never have to worry about it again. The focus isn't going to kind of drift around as you're using it if you've got it locked off. The only negative that I can find is that the focus ring feels kind of stiff when you're using it. They have put a little notch on the ring here to give you some purchase when you're trying to use it, but it's kind of just one little spot, so it's a pain to try and find it sometimes. It's not so stiff that you can't turn it, it's just heavier than I would have liked. If you're somebody who's especially shooting like video and stuff like that, you may find it a little bit too stiff for your liking. It's a shame really, considering they've got this lock dial up here that lets you loosen or stiffen up the focus ring. I would have liked the loosest setting of the focus just to be a little bit easier than it is to turn, but that's really the only gripe that I have. One thing I do like about this lens though is that at the infinity marker, there's almost like a semi-stop before you go into hyperfocal. So you'll be able to know without even looking at the lens exactly where infinity is. So for example, I close my eyes and there. So if you're out somewhere doing astrophotography in the complete pitch black and you can't see the focus scale, you won't need to switch on your head torch or anything to be able to find where the infinity marker actually is, provided you can obviously find your camera in the pitch black. On the back of the lens we have electronic contacts, so the aperture in this is electronically controlled. It will hook up to your light meter and everything else, so you get full functionality with this lens. It's just the focus you don't get. Even using the Sigma MC11 adapter through a Sony body, the camera could still control the aperture and still had no problems metering either. There's also a slot on the back for using rear gel filters, or Irix do sell a filter holder that lets you put 150mm square filters over the front of it. So who are ultra-wide angles such as this aimed at? Well, ultra-wide angles are great at making small things seem a lot bigger. That sounds so wrong in my head. What I mean is interior photography, that sort of thing. You know, estate agents will use wider angle lenses to make spaces seem a lot bigger than they are. To demonstrate this, for example, right now I am using a 28mm focal length for this video. Now, quite a kind of popular wide angle focal length is about 16mm. So this is what this scene would look like at 16mm. Quite a bit wider, I think you'll agree. It certainly makes the room look a lot bigger than it actually is. But now, how does 11mm compare to this? Whoa! Hello over there. So yeah, 11mm on a full frame makes a huge difference as to how much you can actually see of a room. It makes even a small room like this seem huge. But here's where the problem of ultra-wide angle comes in. Because everything becomes so stretched out, the subjects in the frame become a lot smaller. So if you're trying to isolate a particular subject, you have to get so much closer to the subject to be able to kind of single it out. Now, I would have liked to have taken this out doing some astro shots. Unfortunately, I'm kind of time restricted as to how long I've got with this lens before I need to send it back to Irix. Right now, it's the middle of summer. We've just had the summer solstice, so kind of the nights around here aren't particularly dark anyway, and what nights I have seen, it's been cloudy. So unfortunately, not actually been able to test this for astrophotography. But I did take this lens out and about on a bit of a hike just to see how well it performed. And overall, a very impressive performance, all things considered. In terms of sharpness, straight from f4, the center of the frame is very sharp. The corners do drop off a little bit, but then an ultra-wide angle lens, they all do, in fairness. And once you stop the lens down a little bit to like f5.6, f8, those corners sharpen back up very well. Now, ultra-wide angle lenses do have a tendency of showing chromatic aberration and flaring just because of the extreme optical design. And this one's no different. When I was out and about in the woods with this lens, I did notice, particularly in photos where there was like a canopy of leaves above me and the sun was shining through them, that if those leaves were off in the kind of tops or the sides of the frame, that on the contrasting edges you got a very heavy purple glow. But thankfully, chromatic aberration is very easy to correct in Lightroom, so it's a bit of a pain, yes, but it's not exactly like it's going to completely ruin your images. Same with the vignetting. There is some mild vignetting in the corners with this lens, but stop it down to f5.6, f8, the vignetting all but goes. And again, with likes of Lightroom and Photoshop these days, vignetting is very easy to correct. But it is worth noting that, for the moment at least anyway, there are no correction profiles in Lightroom for Irix lenses, so you will have to do it manually. Another thing that tends to hinder ultra-wide angle lenses is lens flare, i.e. when you point the lens at a bright light, because of the extreme optical design, you tend to get kind of light reflecting in all directions and it creates this weird flaring pattern. And while this lens does have certain glass elements inside and special coatings that are supposed to help reduce the flare, there is still flare present. But again, ultra-wide angle lenses like this, they're all gonna show some flaring. So optically, no, this is not the best lens on the market. There are arguably better performing lenses on the market, but there are no ultra-wide angle lenses of this sort of focal length for this sort of price. In fact, there's only one other lens on the market currently that goes to 11mm, and that is the Canon 11 to 24mm f4L. Now that lens is not only about 50% heavier than this lens, it's also 5 times the price at nearly £2,800. Now, from what I've seen of the Irix compared to the Canon, in terms of sharpness at 11mm, there's not actually that much difference. Where the Canon kind of holds its own better is with the likes of the flaring and the chromatic aberrations. For me personally, while I think the Canon is optically better than the Irix, I don't think it's 5 times better than the Irix. So for bang for your buck, this is winning that one. Other notable wide-angle lenses you consider, well, you've got the Sony 12 to 24mm f4, which is about £1,400 at the moment, but is still about the same sort of weight as the Canon as well, so it's quite a lot of glass to be lugging around with you. If you're a Sony shooter, then you have the Sony 12 to 24mm f4, which makes use of the shortened flange distance of a mirrorless camera, so the weight of that is down to less than 600 grams, so it's actually lighter than this, even though it's a zoom. But it's £1,700, which means it's 3 times more expensive than the Irix. So again, it's kind of hard to justify 3 times the price for not 3 times the performance. The closest contender I can find to the Irix 11mm is the Laowa 12mm f2.8. Now, that is a 12mm versus an 11mm, so it's not quite as wide, but the Laowa does have 2 distinct advantages versus the Irix. Firstly, the Laowa is an f2.8 as opposed to an f4, so you get a stop more light if you're shooting low light situations, or you can stop the Laowa down to f4 and it's going to have kind of less vignetting and kind of control chromatic aberrations and stuff a little bit better than this is. The other big advantage to the Laowa is that it is a zero distortion lens, or close to zero distortion. So the Irix, to be honest, doesn't have a huge amount of distortion. There's about 3% barrel distortion with this lens, but to be honest, through the time that I've been shooting with it, I have not really noticed the distortion all that much in actual photographs. I mean, maybe if you're somebody shooting cityscapes and stuff like that, then you might start to notice all the straight lines are starting to bend towards the edges. So, you know, you have to kind of decide as to whether that distortion is going to affect you or not. But the negative to the Laowa is that it's kind of close to £1,000, so is like almost double the price of the Firefly and about 30% more expensive than the Blackstone. So there are other lenses on the market that might be better suited to what you are looking for, but from a price to performance point of view, this lens for me is the best option on the market right now. An 11mm full frame lens for £500 is kind of a no-brainer to me, and if I was in the market for that wider focal length, this is where my money would be going. But what do you guys think? Do you like the look of the Irix? Are you considering buying one? Have you already owned either the 11 or the 15mm? What did you make of it? Have you owned other wide-angle lenses that you think are a better alternative? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and as always, hopefully, I will see you in the next video.